Hello YouTube, welcome back to another episode. I'm Mark and I'm handy by necessity, and today my necessity is I need to put in a hardwood laminate floor. I'll walk you through the steps that are required to do this, and just show you that this is really a very easy project that anybody can do. First thing is clear your floor area. Today's laminate flooring, really, if you have a hard flooring already, maybe a vinyl floor or even tile, you can lay it right over the top of that. You don't have to remove that. But if you have carpeting like we did, you do need to strip that carpeting up and scrape up any spots where the padding was glued down, any bumps. In this case, there was lumps of drywall mud from original construction. That all needs to be scraped up, because if you have clumps like that and you have a seam between the board that's sitting on a clump, it can weaken that seam over time and cause a failure or a splitting of the seam. So once you have your floor cleaned, or clean of those sorts of things, then you need to put an underlayment. Underlayments come in various forms. The one that I'm using is a folded sheet underlayment. It's basically a thin sheet of foam with a foil on the top of it. These also come in rolls. So, look at your floor, see what your floor manufacturer recommends for the underlayment, go with that. In any case, you want to put your underlayment down. Onto the floor surface. So the first piece of the underlayment is in. We'll take another piece, butt it up to that, and then we'll take the seams and again use the tape that's specified for your particular brand of underlayment. Now, the reason you're using underlayment, first of all, it may not be necessary depending on what kind of flooring you have. It may not require an underlayment, but if it does, it accomplishes several things. One, it's a thermal barrier so that the floor is more comfortable, but it's not just about comfort, because if your floor is changing temperatures, it's expanding and contracting as it heats up and cools down. So if we can buffer some of that change in temperature, we'll limit the amount of change and expansion. So that protects the floor from wear in expansion and contraction. It's also going to make it quieter to walk on, so it's a quieter floor. It's a moisture barrier. In this case, I have a slab on grade. You would think that's dry, but you do get moisture that comes through that concrete from the ground below. And since we're dealing with a wood product, that moisture is not good for it. So this keeps the moisture from coming below to the wood product that we're using. And all of this works together to increase the stability of the floor and make for a long life for the floor. So basically at this point, we're cutting this to fit, and I want to start off with too much material. That's why it's mowed up in the middle, and I'll just need to trim some off of this end around this doorway to make sure that it all slides in to place. So we'll do that now. Okay, now that we have our underlayment in place, we're ready to start laying the floor. We need to get one course of the flooring down straight up against the wall to begin with, and then we'll start working our way out. This flooring has a tongue and groove system that interlocks. We have a wide side and a narrow side. They go together, and and then latch together. Some flooring systems don't click together like that, but maybe need to be glued together. But most of the modern flooring systems do latch together like that. You can optionally use glue if you want to. If you think you may want to pull this up at some point in the future, or if you just feel that your flooring system has a good design, glue is not required. I'm not going to be using glue on this floor. So the first thing is to butt end to end. And it's important to get those seams very flush so that when we come back with the next piece across that seam, it'll be very much lined up, so it will look really good across that seam. So the first step, as I said, is to get one course laid out lengthwise. You do this all the way down. Push the board against the wall, and we have spacers that we can lay on the floor. You can make your own spacers. You don't have to buy these special spacers, but these are handy to have. One side is a 1/4 inch, the other side is a 1/2 inch. The 1/2 inch is used for laminate flooring. The trouble is, if you make your own, a lot of times it wants to fall. It doesn't want to stand up straight. So I figured it was worth a couple of bucks to get a bag of these. Plus I can reuse them on other floors. I bought a pallet that was on clearance. So my pallet has a lot of damaged corners, so I have to be careful of that. You probably won't have quite that issue. So at this point, I'll need to measure to length, remembering to leave a 1/2 inch on either end for expansion. A 1/4 to a 1/2 inch on either end for expansion. Now, I can adjust for the walls if they're not quite straight. I don't want to leave it so wide that my gap can't be covered with 1/4 round, but I don't want to leave it too narrow so that it can't expand. In this case, the baseboard is high enough that in expansion it can go under it, so I probably will go closer to a 1/4 of an inch, but I'll set this up and measure, and then cut this board to fit. I have exactly 18 inches between the end of this board and the baseboard. Remember, we need a 1/4 of an inch gap. It's important to transfer that to the correct side of the board though, or the correct end. If I measured from this end, that wouldn't work, because this is the end that has to mate up on this joint. So I have to measure from that end, and I have to measure touches the other board 17 3/4 inches. Now, make that cut and see how it lays in. Okay, and the final piece is cut to length, 1/4 inch short. Place it in, spacer just right. Now we'll move to the other end. Start with the next piece. Little bit of a trick to get everything lined up to start with. So we'll get it all lined up, put a spacer there. And then I have this tapping block that has a lip, actually 2 different size lips. I choose the one that's best for my material. And tap that until the seam is very well seated. Making sure to pay attention to this end seam as well. For the next course, remember we want to stagger our joints. So if I use a solid piece of wood, then I would have the previous joint halfway in this piece. You would think that would be good. It would from a structural standpoint from this board to those boards. But the problem is, if I look from this board to 2 courses over, I would have joints that are about 1/4 inch apart. They're essentially the same location. And if I ran this out to the end, brought that piece back down, what I would wind up with would be joints every other board across this floor that are staggered every other board apart. And that does not look good at all. So we need to cut some off of this board. We want to go about halfway between these 2. So that's about 18 inches. So we want to cut about 9 inches off the board. By the way, a note about the direction I'm running the board. I'm running the board lengthwise. As we walk in the door, you're looking lengthwise down the board. That's generally accepted as the best way to do it. There really is no right or wrong way to do it. Another thing you might want to take into consideration is generally most people think it's better to run the board lengthwise on the longest wall of the room, which in my case was the same thing. So off the interior hallway at a right angle, as well as lengthwise on the longest wall of the room. It was the same thing for me. But ultimately, it's whatever you think looks best for you. Those are just conventional trade practices that are used. So I'm going to cut 9 inches off this board, bring it back in, and start that course there. And then we'll stagger another one somewhere that makes it look random, and we'll carry those out. We're starting the 3rd course now. So we staggered the 1st course right in the middle, or the 2nd course right in the middle of the 1st course. The 2nd course, then we came back and split the difference between those 2. So we wouldn't have those seams lined up perfectly. So we can now start working our way down with our planks. That's nice and solid. Instead of just doing one row at a time, I'm going to go ahead and do multiple rows. By the way, when I cut the end off of this board, I put it at the other end so that I can use it when I get to the other end. If not on this course, at least on another course, I can use it to cut and minimize waste. So now, for the next course, what I want to do is stagger the seams again. And this time, I want to stay away from this seam. I want to stay away from this seam. So I'm coming back even further. The goal here is to get as much separation as I can between courses that have seams that are even close together. For the next course, if I start off with a solid board, it'll be 4 courses over before I have another one that's the same length. And that's not too bad, but we can do better than that. If we take a couple of inches off of this, we would be kind of close to this seam and this other seam, but it's going to be hard to do anything that's, if we keep going with this 9-inch stagger, it's going to look like a stair step in one way or another. So if I take a couple of inches off or 3 inches, do something different, then it'll break up that stair step effect. So we don't just keep getting the same back and forth stagger. So I'm going to do a little bit different measure on this and get a different break on the board. This is where the other piece from the other end comes into play. So in this case, it fit perfectly. The one before this, I did have to cut about 1/4 of an inch off. This one is going to fit perfectly. All I have to do is tap it into place. Now the next board, I will need to cut the end off of it to fit in this place. Then start working the other end back this way. One thing I want to mention is when I'm pulling boards out of cartons, I need to have multiple cartons open so that I pull, right now I have 4 cartons open. I'm pulling one from each carton, stack them up, then one from each carton, so I wind up with 8 at a time as I pull them over. Maybe even 6 cartons would be better, but this gives you some variety on boards, and you're not pulling from one carton, which can give you some boards that are very similar all in a row. So I'm just going to keep working this out across the room.